Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. SpaceX has been approved by the FCC to launch their Gen2 satellites, which is really something that they needed to have done. It's not as many, it's only about a quarter of what they wanted, but this is a big step for them. Be right back and we'll talk about that. Thanks for joining me, Rick Uzzi here with Broadband Deployment News. So this happened a week or two ago. See here that FCC partially grants SpaceX Gen2 broadband satellite application. So SpaceX has had their Gen1 satellites up there. These Gen2 satellites are much bigger, and these require the SpaceX's Starship, this huge rocket, in order to get them in orbit. But they've been kind of laying the groundwork to get approval to have these satellites up there. And they want actually 30,000 of them up there, but they've only been granted limited approval of about a quarter of that, 7,500, almost exactly a quarter. So again, this requires the much larger launch vehicle to do this, and these are much bigger. They're like 5 times bigger and heavier than the, I think they're like 22 feet and like 5 times heavier than the traditional satellites that they've been launching up there. So you can see here, I'll go ahead and link to this on the FCC site where you can download the order. I'm not going to look at the order really. I just wanted to show you it's a fairly long document. You can see here it talks about what they are going to be able to do and some things that they can't do, other kinds of issues. I'll just look at the introduction here. So in this order, an authorization, we grant in part and defer in part with conditions the applications of SpaceX to construct and deploy and operate a constellation of 29,988 non-geostationary orbit NGSO, or these are low Earth orbit satellites, to be known as its second generation Starlink constellation, Gen2 Starlink, using Ku, Ka, and E-band frequencies to provide fixed satellite services. Specifically, we grant SpaceX authority to construct and deploy and operate up to 7,500 satellites, operating at altitudes of 525, 530, and 535 kilometers. And then it's got the inclinations here, the angles, the degrees, respectively, using frequencies in Ku and Ka band. So at this point, they're deferring, as you can see, 3/4 of the numbers of satellites, and then also they are deferring the decision about the E band. So they're going to be able to do it in the Ku and the Ka band. So this particular article has a good summary. I'm just going to look at this real quick. Again, they authorized 7,500 next-gen satellites. The FCC issued a key authorization to Elon Musk SpaceX on Thursday, granting approval for the company to move forward with launching up to 7,500 next-gen satellites in its Starlink internet network. Our action will allow SpaceX to begin deployment of Gen2 Starlink, the FCC wrote in the order. The FCC did not grant SpaceX full application, which included deployment of nearly 30,000 satellites in low Earth orbit. And it placed some conditions on the company's plan to deploy the satellites. It deferred decision on the application to launch the full number. The FCC imposed a limit on the number of satellites, also known as Gen2, in order to address concerns about orbital debris and space safety. So that was the main concern that was being brought up was, as you get all of these satellites up there, again, they're looking at 30,000, with, I believe it was 12,000 of the original satellites that they were going to have, and then 30,000 of these next gen for like 42,000 total satellites. So they're concerned obviously about the number of satellites that are up there and the kind of debris that could cause if you've got collisions or satellites that don't deorbit properly. So there's lots of provisions in this order about what SpaceX has to do, Starlink has to do in order to mitigate that. So this could be like a trial run to see how these 7,500 do, and then also to make sure that Starlink has all of the things in place, all of the policies in place and the technology in place to mitigate this debris issue. And then also they need to be, if you read the order, they need to be working closely with astronomers, astronomy organizations that, again, are concerned about the number of these satellites up there and how that's going to be obscuring their view of the skies as you've got these constellations constantly overhead moving. So those are some of the things that they need to be taking into account. SpaceX is also required to coordinate with other satellite operators as well as with NASA and the National Science Foundation to protect science missions and radio astronomy, respectively, as I mentioned there. The FCC's decision is crucial to SpaceX's plan to expand its satellite network, which had been hotly contested in filings with the regulator from companies including Viasat, Dish, and Amazon. So those would be competing providers. Viasat specifically a geosynchronous satellite provider. Amazon is going to be launching their Kuiper project, which is a low Earth orbit satellite constellation. It's going to be up higher, so it's going to have fewer satellites. It's going to be much higher than a lot of these satellites that Starlink is doing, but they're in the process of doing that. And then you've got OneWeb also that's launching. I think they're going to be focusing more commercial. To date, SpaceX has launched about 3,500 first-gen Starlink satellites into orbit. The service has about 500,000 subscribers as of June. The company has steadily expanded Starlink's product offerings as well, selling services to residential, business, RV, maritime, and aviation customers. So they are definitely having an impact with 500,000 subscribers. And this is a service that is very needed in areas right now. Now, obviously, we're trying to get fiber installed in lots of different areas, but there are people that, this is just a godsend for them when they realize that, they can get Starlink service if they can afford it and get much, much faster speeds. This is from the order, and it's showing the, they wanted approximately 30,000 satellites, and it's showing what they wanted here, but the only areas that they were awarded in the 7,500 were these particular altitudes. And I went ahead and I added the miles here for those of us in the US that don't really speak kilometer. A kilometer is about, a mile is about 0.6 something of a kilometer. So you can see here, in the low end, 525 kilometers, that's 326 miles up to 332 miles. And specifically, they said that they cannot do anything over 560 kilometers. So these, I don't know if that means permanently, or specifically they mentioned in this order that they were limiting it to 500 and anything below 560, but they didn't, they weren't doing this. So, and you can see the numbers here. So specifically, SpaceX now proposes to operate again about 30,000 satellites, ranging from 340 kilometers to 614. Approximately 2/3 of the satellites would be deployed in the shells centered at altitudes from 340 to 360. So that would be these here. So that was about 2/3 of them. And then approximately 1/3 would be deployed in a constellation centered at altitudes from 525 to 535. So that's what they're being allowed to do. And that 1/3, that's the 7,500. And then they also want to deploy 468 satellites in retrograde installations and shell-centered altitudes of 604 kilometers and 614 kilometers. And they're proposed, and this was the proposal right here. So again, in this order, they said they're not granting anything over the 560, I believe, to try to make sure that they don't interfere with NASA operations. Now, again, whether that's a temporary thing, it's not as many satellites, obviously, it was only 468, but unless that's a temporary thing, I don't know if it's temporary or permanent actually, so, but you can see there, that's just from the order, that particular page. And then they've also had out for a while their Gen2 dish, if you can call it a dish. It's rectangular now, maybe it should be called a plate. So this is their original Gen 1, and this has been out for a while. I don't believe there's any requirement, in other words, if the Gen 2 satellites go up, I don't think there's a requirement that you would need a Gen 2 dish or plate. I think it's just this was their attempt to try to bring the price down because they can actually make more of these this way. I don't know why. Trying to bring the weight down and the size down a little bit. If you can see here, it's the diameter of the round one is 23.2 inches. The dimensions on this rectangular one is 19 by 12. This is interesting. The weight on the round one is 16 pounds, and it says 9.2 pounds on the Gen 2 with cable. So maybe they're not weighing the cable. I think this must include the cable here. It just doesn't say it, maybe, because my understanding is the cable on the round version was attached, like hardwired attached. And if you had a problem with the cable, you had to cut it off and send the dish back. This new one has a detachable cable, which is good, although it's got a proprietary connector on it, which is not good. But at least if excuse me, if you have an issue, you have to worry about the pardon me. If you have an issue, you don't need to worry about the cable and getting that disconnected and all of that. Wish I had a glass of water here. I think I'll get it together. So that's the two dishes. And again, I don't think this is required or operating with the Gen2 satellites. So in other words, when the Gen2 satellites are launched, I don't think you're going to have to switch out your dishes. I think this is just, again, a new version that they were able to make a little bit more economically, a little lighter. They could make more of them. Instead of 5,000 a week, they could make multiples of that in a week on that Gen2 dish. Now, one of the reasons that this is really needed is because, I'll go back to the top of this article here, just looking at it. This is from Ookla. So their speeds have been declining as they add customers. Naturally, as they add subscribers, that's going to increase the amount of bandwidth on these satellites, and that's a fixed amount of bandwidth, and they've got to get more satellites in the constellation to be able to handle that. So you see here, Starlink speeds dipped slightly during Q3 2022 as the space race heats up. Ookla's exciting fresh data from Q3 2022 for SpaceX's Starlink, Usenet, and Viasat in North and South America, as well as new Starlink markets we haven't yet featured on our ongoing series on satellite internet. With accelerating competition on the horizon for 2023, again, that could be from somebody like Amazon, we've been eager to see how Starlink continues to perform, especially as building new fiber connections continues to be costly around the world. And now, obviously, we've got a lot of federal money that's going to be coming towards broadband deployment. Already is, from programs like ARPA and RDOF and what else is there? USDA Reconnect. So lots of money's out there already being deployed, to helping deploy fiber. But one thing that we have seen with fiber is it's gotten more expensive with inflation rates the way they are. That's just not just materials, but also for salaries for people that are putting the fiber in the ground to be able to hire the kind of people you need, whether that be contractors, engineers, whatever. All of that's gone up. So while the cost of fiber in general, fiber deployment has really come down over the years, it's gone up again to some extent because of inflation. Says this analysis includes results from 5 additional countries, 2 new providers, and expanded data for Starlink, Usenet, and Viasat. We also examine how Starlink's internet performance has changed over the past year in Canada, Chile, and the United States. So again, it says Starlink performance dipped once again during Q3 2022, although only slightly. So they've dipped. And again, they've got 500,000 customers now. So as they add subscribers, this is going to be something that's going to happen. And that's why they're trying to get more satellites in the air. And especially their next gen satellites that are going to have, I believe, more capabilities. So you can see here, this is now, we are looking at, I believe this is Chile, the US, and Canada. And you can see in Chile, they've got some really good speeds there. So you've got, this is all providers, and their average is over 200 megabits per second. All providers in the US combined, looks like under 175, it's over 150. All providers in Chile download is actually higher than all providers upload in Canada. This is all providers uploaded in Canada, and this is all providers download in Chile. Then you've got SpaceX here. This is download speeds for Chile, Canada, and the US. So again, highest speeds here, probably because that market was added last, because the way that Starlink has been doing this is, I think they started in the upper parts of North America and have been moving down to the south as they do that. So you can see Canada actually, though, is higher than the US here a little bit. So you're talking about here in the US, just above 50. Now this is an average in the US, and it's going to vary based on the part of the US as well. There are people that are still getting over 100 megabits per second, and I guess maybe there's people on the lower end, even lower than 50. But you can see here that, again, that's Canada. Then you've got all download speeds other than Chile, which is, again, way up here. You've got Canada, US, and then you've got SpaceX, Starlink in Chile, Canada, and US here. So you're talking, somewhere in the 10 to 30 megabits per second range, I guess, if you look at that. It says, perhaps a victim here of their own success, Starlink download speeds dropped once again in Canada, at least 14%, and the US at least 70% from Q2 to Q3. Over the past year, we've seen more users flock to sign up for Starlink, reaching 400,000 users worldwide, and again, now it's like 500,000. Speeds have started to decrease, without a doubt. Starlink often can be a life-changing service for consumers where connectivity is inadequate or non-existent. That's true. That's absolutely true. So if somebody's out there on a farm and the best they have is almost nothing to, let's say, the minimum broadband 25 by 3, it's very possible that they can get 3 times that with with Starlink. So it's a very noticeable difference if somebody switches from whatever they have now, which is maybe a slow DSL connection, to Starlink. Even if speed's slow, they still provide more than enough connectivity to do almost everything consumers normally need to do, including streaming 4K video and video messaging. The biggest thing you might have issues with is if you're trying to play multiplayer online games. Even being a low Earth orbit satellite, latency still lags far behind low latency fixed broadband connections. And that's true, far behind low latency. So it's not that far off of, let's say, DOCSIS cable. Fiber is going to be the lowest latency naturally, but DOCSIS is they're doing some things with DOCSIS to try to get low latency DOCSIS implemented that can help there. But still, latency as far as normal kinds of stuff is very, very good. If you've got a geosynchronous satellite connection, that's very different, because instead of being 300 miles up, you're more like 20 to 30,000 miles up. Huge difference. Even though things travel very quickly in the vacuum of space, it's a huge difference when you're talking about that kind of distance. Starlink uploaded speeds remain roughly unchanged in all 3 countries we surveyed during Q3 2022, improving marginally in Canada and Chile, and essentially staying the same in the US. And again, it says Starlink remains a boon for rural consumers who can afford it. That's true, if they can afford it. It's pricey. $90, is it 90 or 99? It might be 100. It's like 99, I think, a month. And then the equipment's about $500. So it's not cheap. But if somebody can afford it, again, you might pay, let's say, $60 a month for fiber. If you can afford an extra $30 and you don't have fiber as an option, people are going to do that if they can afford it. Starlink expansion here in U.S. counties. You see this QT to Q3, 2021 to 2022. So this is year over year, and you can see the coverage that they had. And this would be, I'm assuming, subscribers that have people that have Starlink in various counties. So you can see it's all over the U.S. because there are areas all over the U.S. that have issues where they don't have good service. Although, there are also areas that I see here that probably have other options, but yet they're getting Starlink for one reason or another, because this is broader coverage than I would have expected originally. I would have expected it to look more like this, where you had pockets of areas that were underserved and unserved, where you were having people get Starlink. These could be, you could have maybe 1 or 2 people in one county, and maybe that's why they count that. So in other words, Ookla somebody does a speed test, and it could be 1 or 2 people in a county, and it shows up as being this county is served or has a customer, so to speak, from Starlink. Over the past year, Starlink has proliferated across the U.S., going from having at least 10 unique users here's the information, in 776 U.S. counties, or roughly 25% of all counties, during Q2, Q3, to 2,400 counties, or roughly 75% of counties. So they're saying at least 10 unique users. So that must be how they're coloring in that county if you've got 10 unique users. That marks about a 200% increase year over year, indicating consumer confidence in the provider. So then we got Starlink in Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands. And it says here that Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands had the fastest satellite internet in North America. So again, you can see here, you've got all fixed U.S. So you've got up here speeds of 164 by 22, latency of 27 milliseconds, and that's all combined. Then you've got Canada. You can see the numbers for Canada. Then you've got SpaceX Puerto Rico, 85.88 average downloads and 9.9 upload. And latency, that 114 is a little higher than I would have thought for them. Again, these are averages, and this is through Ookla. Then you've got U.S. Virgin Islands, very similar there for SpaceX. And you've got all fixed combined in Puerto Rico there. So this was U.S., Canada. Then you've got Puerto Rico. So SpaceX is actually doing pretty well there compared to fixed services in Puerto Rico. I'm sure less fiber there than you have in the U.S. here. Then you got SpaceX in the DR, SpaceX in Canada, Mexico, and then the U.S. And then as we go down here, various countries, you can see numbers get slower and slower. Then you get into the geosynchronous satellites, and you get Viasat here, HughesNet. So you can see, again, a big difference if somebody is in an area where they've had satellite. Maybe they didn't even have DSL. Maybe all they had was geosynchronous satellite So they can jump up from, let's say, in the 20s, depending on where they are and the number of subscribers that are using the service in that area, anywhere from, let's say, I would say, it's probably somewhere in this range most of the time for people, and some are getting higher levels. Some are getting over 100 megabits per second. That's reported, and I've seen that on speed tests that people do via Ookla that have Starlink, but over time that goes down as you get more subscribers. So it's going to vary. But I would say a lot of people are probably in this range with Starlink. So that's much better than your geosynchronous satellite kinds of things. So again, SpaceX, it's really a phenomenal kind of technology. Just Elon Musk jumping into this with both feet and being first to market with these low Earth orbit satellites, and he's got 500 million subscribers right now. Again, a lot of this will change as you get more competition, and that's going to be competition from 5G service providers that are in an area that can provide fixed wireless service that are at speeds comparable or better than the satellite service through Starlink, something that can maybe get over 100 megabits per second with a 5G fixed wireless connection. Competition from maybe somebody like Amazon with Kuiper, that'd be another satellite service. So I think it'd be less likely that somebody would leave a satellite service and go to another satellite service. And they might not leave a satellite service to go to a fixed wireless service unless they're not getting good service from, let's say, Starlink. But then you got fiber. Then you've got all of the federal money that's going to be coming out for fiber deployment. So there are going to be customers in certain areas now that maybe have a slower cable connection. Maybe it's not DOCSIS. Maybe it's not even DOCSIS 3. It's certainly maybe not DOCSIS 3.1. Let's say they got a slower cable connection, or they've got DSL. And they're really, really unserved or underserved. Those are the people right now that I think would be opting for either a 5G service or a satellite service like Starlink service, low Earth orbit, in order to boost their speeds before, let's say, fiber comes in. But in those areas that have satellite, if they're an area that has unlicensed spectrum, 5G, or they've got any kind of satellite service, as far as the BEAD program goes, that is still considered not reliable internet. So the BEAD program, in order for it to be reliable internet, needs to be a wired service or a fixed wireless service that has licensed spectrum. And I think it might be able to be a combination of unlicensed and licensed spectrum, but it can't be all unlicensed spectrum. So all of those areas will be fair game for another operator to come in with fiber, assuming that it's economically viable. And again, prices have gone up due to inflation. So people that have looked at what it's going to cost to put fiber in an area maybe need to look at that again and determine, okay, well, prices have gone up and the price of money has gone up. That's another important thing, is that if they were looking at getting loans to be able to finance a lot of this, the interest rates have gone up. So the cost of that money has gone up. So there may be more areas that are going to be looked at as high cost now, where they're saying, this needs to be a 5G play for now, or even a Starlink play. And money can go to those technologies in certain situations. The state has some leeway there on doing that if these areas are very, very high cost. But I think the vast majority of these areas, if they've got pretty good density, I think they're going to be doing fiber in those areas, even with the prices going up, because there's federal money out there, and operators can be trying to take advantage of that to be able to get their technology in the ground or in the air, if it's 5G or satellite, whatever. But I think the fiber providers can be trying to get their technology in the ground to cover these areas, because they want to take advantage of the federal money that's available now that's not going to be available maybe ever again. The way they're talking about this, because it's a lot of money in addition to all the money right now that's available through these other programs. We've got another $42.45 billion that's going to be allocated through BEAD, but that's not going to be until sometime really late next year or into 2024. By the time those dollars for deployment start getting sent out to the states and then to the subgrantees, it's going to be a really long time. So a lot's going to happen between now and then through the deployment of fiber and other technologies, through some of these current broadband grants that are being put out, through things like ARPA, through RDOF money that's been allocated, through the USDA Reconnect. All of that money is going to be being put to use in the meantime. And there'll be some 5G deployment as well with licensed spectrum that will be taking some of those areas off the map. So we'll have to see what happens. As far as timing on all of that, the new broadband maps are out now, and consumers are able to challenge their areas. There are others, any interest groups and service providers can do big bulk challenges on that data. They need to get that out before, I think it's like the second week of January is the deadline on that. So all those challenges come in, and then that new fabric is out, and then service providers will overlay their coverage area on that new fabric, and then the new map will be out sometime in the spring, and that's when the NTIA will determine how much each state will get from the BEAD funds, and then you've got a lot of back and forth between the states and the subgrantees and the states and the NTIA and their 5-year plans, and again, all of that's going to take a while, so probably the rest of the year, and then money either late in the year or early in 2024 is when we'll start to see that. So thanks for joining me. If this was interesting or helpful, if you would, give me a like on the video. I'd appreciate that. Even the fact that I coughed there and couldn't talk for a second, thanks for waiting as I could talk on that. And if you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button, ring the little bell, and you'll be notified when I'm live. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.